Hello and welcome to season 2 of Radical Reimagining. Deven and Tiffany and I are so excited to be back, and we're really ready to dive into what has become a dynamic and emergent co-creative space, and we really hope you are too, because that's the magic of the space, that we also get to hear from you. We've seen some beautiful responses over on the blog as we put out our first prompt of 2021, and the community over on Twitter is growing as well. And we're here today for a conversation. We've invited Maddy Frey, an independent evaluation consultant from Atlanta, Georgia, to talk with us about our kind of unusual space that we find ourselves in the beginning of 2021. Welcome, Maddy.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah. So we always like to start off these conversations with a little bit like how you find yourself in this work. We kind of say this is this co-creative space to radically reimagine our field and really how we can be more human in this work. And sort of how do you come to that? How do you find yourself prepared to do that work?
That is a great question. I was thinking about this, and I was thinking how really for the last 10 years, I have been a public health evaluator, committed to using evaluation methods and practices toward evaluating health equity. And it was just this thing, health equity. And it was like in the last column of every logic model. And that's the goal, like regardless of what your program was, that was the goal, health equity. And that it just wasn't questioned. Like that was what I was taught in grad school. Like that's just what we were trying to do in the field of public health. And then I, realized at some point that what is health equity? Like if you're not talking about racial equity, gender equity, equity from a socioeconomic status for sexual orientation, then what are you really talking about? And what had ended up happening is we just put it in the logic model and then weren't ever actually talking about equity. And that was my experience from an evaluation consulting practice. I also worked in philanthropy for 5 years and then started my own practice and just continued doing that same thing for the first year or two of my own practice. Yeah. And kind of recently, in the last 2 years, really, so toward the, I've been doing this for about 10 years now, realized we really aren't talking about equity at all because it's just kind of all clumped together. And my beginning of my sort of aha moment was when I was co-founded a women's professional ultimate Frisbee league. And the Frisbee community is very progressive, very liberal, very white. And so we came up with this mission statement that was we're going to increase racial and gender equity in ultimate Frisbee. And we felt really good about that. And we were doing the right thing, from the outset, yay, and then we just went forward, and so we ended up, we didn't start as an anti-racist organization. We didn't have any sort of equity lens or frameworks or anything. We just said, this is our mission. And then we just went forward with the existing sort of power dynamics and structures that are already in place in the ultimate Frisbee community. And so we started a white women's ultimate Frisbee league. And it's so embarrassing to say that, but it's true. That's what we did, because that's who is currently playing ultimate Frisbee, and we didn't have a more critical lens. And so many people helped me understand that and helped me see how I had been a gatekeeper and helped me and us lead the organization to completely transform, which we did last year. And that's really where I started kind of taking the same lens to my evaluation work. I had even been talking about white supremacy and talking about equity and racial justice in my evaluation practice for a couple of years, but I literally was just talking about it. I wasn't doing anything, and I don't mean to be, oh, you're so horrible. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying I just didn't know that I wasn't doing anything. I thought that we were doing something by talking about it, and not to totally discount that, because even saying the words white supremacy in a room full of white board members is something. It is something. So, but that's really how that kind of transition happened.
The Ultimate Frisbee team is such a great example of seeing that like in action, in action, because sometimes in evaluation we can feel it being in the logic model, oh, that's enough, or we like ask some questions about it, that was enough. But that's such a great example to see the ways in which we only talk about it and don't put it into action. So
exactly.
yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Sure. And yeah, then putting that into action meant, I was the board president and had the most power in the organization as a white person, and so it's like, oh, like I have a lot of power here. And actually doing some coaching with Rita Fierro, she helped me kind of see like, don't just give up your power. Like, yes, give up your power, but do it strategically, and so I went, the organization was a very intensive process, kind of went through this whole thing about like, replacing half of our board and then ultimately replacing the entire executive committee with incredibly qualified women of color who we just hadn't taken the time to go and like, create a process around it. We have just said like, oh, here's who showed up. We'll just take that, Yeah. So yeah, that's a little bit of the like, but I mean, there's so much more obviously underneath all of that. That's kind of the 20-second version. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I think speaking of putting words into action, I think we wanted to talk a little bit about the space that we're in now. And I like to reflect back on Libby's post where she mentioned it's clear 2020 maybe wasn't the problem, which I think that each of us were, maybe we knew that, but we were holding out hope for something different. But that being said, it feels like we're in this kind of transient or in-between state. Libby called it liminal space, which I have to think really hard to say because that's like my new word of the week, maybe the month. But really this space where we're able to kind of bring things with us or perhaps leave some things behind. And so I think just with that preface, wanting to give you the opportunity to respond to this month's prompt, which is kind of multi-pronged, so we can kind of dissect it. But just this idea of what do you feel like as we enter into this space into 2021, what you're leaving behind, what you kind of feel like you're carrying with you that you hope will serve you on kind of this other side, and really what questions are you struggling with in this liminal space?
So many. What do I feel like in this liminal space? I mean, Libby, you used the word disorienting, and I really resonated with that. I think for a couple of reasons. One is just because it is disorienting being in a transition and kind of not knowing kind of where you're going and not knowing exactly what you're seeing or how to kind of absorb it and grasp it. But also because like my experience as an evaluator is often guiding others through that space, like the murky middle, like how do we get from our activities to our outcomes and helping define these things and kind of seeing the themes and putting words on paper and, kind of being a facilitator. And now, the tables have turned, and I'm I feel like this like baby just kind of like, help me. I mean, that's a little extreme, but a little bit like, I feel like I'm sort of looking over this precipice and like, I am looking over the precipice, but I also like have no idea like what is down there. And I know enough to know that I really don't know much, and that's very humbling, but it's also like very exciting, at the same time. And it's very like validating, I guess, that like, I really want to keep going in that direction. So I'm basically in the middle of like completely transforming my approach to evaluation consulting. And as Libby knows, like I'm currently questioning whether or not to stay in the field of evaluation. Although I did attend Donna Merton's talk this morning. Were you on that?
No.
Oh, it was so great. On sort of using mixed methods for kind of transformative work. So it's what kind of our book club has been talking about, but it was really getting at like, let's not be complicit in keeping this white supremacist status quo in place. Like, let's use these tools and these resources to uproot it altogether, you know? And I think where I'm at right now is like, I know that I don't yet have those skills. And I want to do it. So I'm kind of like, am I doing my current clients a disservice? And I don't think I am, but there's that kind of voice in my head that's like, should I just kind of quit for a little while and kind of retrain, unlearn a bunch of stuff and retrain myself and then get back into it?
So I want to follow up real quickly, and you mentioned real briefly in their book club, and so I want to provide a reference for a point for people, for listeners in there, even though we know what we're talking about, is that Maddy and I have been together in a book club that Rita Fierro and I have been facilitating for the last year, where it's a group of white women evaluators who have been exploring our whiteness together in that space, and the work is continuing, you know, kind of in an embodied way as we're going to start My Grandmother's Hands here in the coming weeks. But you know, you posed a question to that group, Maddy, about, you know, and you said it just now, of like, should we still be in this work? And I'm going to answer it here, even though I wasn't able to join that.
Really curious about your answer.
Join that conversation. Is yeah, absolutely. We're not going to relinquish the evaluation to the people who are just going to do it without this lens, or like without moving in this direction. Right. So yeah, absolutely, we're staying in the work. And you know, I think you've pointed out some really important things there, that you can, you know, you're coming to this work with a sense of humility, knowing that you need to unlearn things. You have a willingness to do that work, to move in that direction. So you'll just continue to do better and better evaluation work. So my brief answer to that is, yeah, absolutely, we stay in this work, right? And because we're developing that eye for seeing where it does cause harm, right? And developing the ear to be listening to the people who have been telling us it causes harm.
Yeah.
And so, you know, we have to, you know, the people, you know, like yourself who are in this work have to stay in it to, you know, we don't leave it because we think we're doing it poorly. If you need to move on to do something else you're excited about, of course, but we have to stay in it because we have to continue to spread that message that we need to look at it at the ways that it has caused harm in the past, and how to move it to a place that doesn't. So that's my short answer.
That's very compelling. And honestly, like, you're catching me on a day when I'm like 51%, I want to stay in it, you know?
Donna Mertens always helps with that too, I think.
Oh my gosh, it was so inspiring. And just her stories. And then on the days when I'm 49%, it's because I'm like, well, if we really want to dismantle white supremacy, like, is evaluation the way to do it? You know? And yes, actually, because there's injustice everywhere. So in our little corner, this is where we're dismantling it. And yeah, I do like it. And it's, so there's that.
Very good.
Devin, I feel like you had like a 3-part question. I answered maybe one part.
I know. It's like if I was writing a survey, I think I broke all the rules there. But I feel like I think you captured each one of the aspects of that. I guess I'll just reflect back that I resonate with what you're sharing, and kind of this idea as I've become more convicted the past several years, and of course throughout last year, of, you know, this, what space should I be taking up, and what is my role, and where do others need me to be versus where I think I need to be. And that's been challenging. And I think even as we've been focusing on in the Arizona evaluation network, of bringing in this equity lens of, you know, do we keep inviting people in while we know it's broken right now? How do we like build it or fix it as we fly? And I mean, there's just all these, I'm still grappling with this month's prompt, right? But I guess just to share that, you know, it helps me also to hear your perspective, Libby, and it reaffirms, yes, we need to be here, because if we give up that power, it kind of goes back to what you were sharing about ultimate Frisbee, right? How are we strategically giving away that power? Because we know that we have it out of privilege, but then how can that be reallocated in such a way that's intentional versus walking away? So
yeah, exactly. And that's really tough to figure out and do in a way that's not paternalistic and respectful. And
right.
There's so much in there, and it's a lot about slowing down. It's been a lot about slowing down. Like one of your questions, I think, was, what are you leaving behind? And really this like urgency, this white supremacy culture, this urgency, this perfectionism, this expectation that even when we do racial justice work, we're perfect, you know? So really trying to leave that behind. And a quick anecdote, I feel so thankful to Vidya Shankar for calling me in. I don't know if any of you are from Libby, I think you are, but I had this amazing experience where she just educated me on a public kind of post and showed me like kind of how wrong I was and how ignorant I was, you know, really. And I mean, it was so impactful to me because it like showed me like, oh, you can make mistakes, and you can make mistakes publicly. And guess what? You're still a person and you're still a human. And like, and I was so lucky to get like, to make a mistake with someone who's amazing and could like educate me in that way, and could help me kind of see what I was missing. And then that helped me kind of encourage other people to like take risks and make mistakes and like, look, like public humiliation is the best way to learn something really fast, you know?
It's the addressing it head on, right? Like, I think that that's what's really interesting. I totally empathize and am relating and quietly thinking about the toughness of being in the evaluation profession that comes out of this conversation. I mean, it's just tough space. And that really does go right back to what Libby wrote in her post. Like we are in this liminal space right now as a society. And the word liminal isn't new to me because I've been exploring it for a little while. And Peter Dollerson actually equates the role of evaluation to this idea of the liminal space. Like what is it that evaluators should be doing? And I was like 2 minutes before we got on here together, I was like, where's that quote that I want to share with everybody? And he said, what we learn from understanding evaluation as a liminal activity is that it is a wonderful object of sociological analysis. In evaluation, society seeks to reflect on itself while showing what it subliminally really thinks is important. Important to maintain, important to believe, important to change, and important to avoid. No wonder evaluation is difficult and mysterious.
Oh, I love that.
I love it. We'll put a link to that in the show notes too, so people can come back to that. That's a good quote.
It's really like, we're grappling right now. What Libby really hit on in her blog post is like we're right at that precipice, like we've been talking about. And as evaluators, we are interestingly equipped to sit in that space and ask good questions. But what I hear from you, Maddy, is that it's hard, and I'm totally feeling it. I am totally feeling it, and I just wanted to say I appreciate you sharing the struggle.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. Yeah, it's hard. And it's hard to kind of have your own process while you're kind of helping your clients have their process. And then especially, you know, introducing that lens of racial equity too. It's, you know, I have one white client that I'm kind of, you know, pushing and asking them to do these things. I'm like, oh God, if I ask them to do that, is the lens going to be turned on me? And it's like, well, good. It would be great if the lens would be turned on, you know, wouldn't that be great if we all could like do this together? And like, kind of, you know, that whole question of like, well, I can't call this other person out because I'm not perfect. Well, then no, nobody's perfect. Like we still have to kind of bring attention to these things. And it's just hard to be in that space and kind of, be like, my clients are paying me to do this work, you know, and so I'm doing it. And then sometimes they don't like it, you know?
Yeah, that's the thing that came to mind kind of as, you know, Tiffany was saying that too, of how hard it can be to sit in these places sometimes is that growth is uncomfortable and messy, and you know, you could refer to it as the messy middle. Is like as we move through these things, the unlearning, the, you know, conversations with clients, whatever it is, it's not going to feel good. And if we walk away from it because it's uncomfortable, then we're not doing our work, right? So we have to learn to be comfortable with the uncomfortable. So, and I think that, you know, that's with the book club, that's some of what we've been doing, is like, how can we be okay with being in that discomfort?
I think I'm looking for a quote that I was just reading today as well, earlier today, about sort of the importance of that discomfort and that conflict, and how we need to kind of stay in it. I'm sure you all know this book.
One of my favorites.
Good book. Good book.
Yes, it's so good. And
This is Adrienne Marie Brown's Emergent Strategy, for the folks who are just listening.
Yes. She's talking about inclusivity, and she says it requires more than tokenism. It cannot be achieved without diversity at the planning table, in staffing, and in coordination. It may delay achievement of other important goals. It will require discussion, hard work, patience, and advanced planning. It may involve conflict, but through this conflict, we can learn better ways of working together. That was meaningful to me.
Oh, I love that. That is one of my absolute favorite books. I go back to it often. So,
reference.
Indeed. Well, thank you very much for joining us for this conversation. I'm so happy to be able to continue to be in this conversation with you as we continue to do our work in the book club. And I'm glad you were able to join Tiffany and Deven and I today.
Thank you so much for having me, and thanks to all three of you for kind of creating this space, this learning space. It's been wonderful to kind of follow along and learn from you through the blog and through your kind of Twitter community that you're creating. So just really happy to be a part of it.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Maddy.
Yeah.